Margot Shaw thought moving to California would finally show her who Gong Ga-min really was. Instead, she met a woman determined to show her how his world worked. At first it felt harmless. Exclusive invitations. Doors opening. People returning calls they'd ignored for months. But California had a way of revealing things slowly. A conversation that shifted the air. A look people gave her when she said his name. A moment she wasn't meant to witness. But the longer Margot stayed in California, the harder it became to ignore a simple question. Was she learning how to survive Ga-min's world? Or becoming someone she no longer recognized? She had been bracing for shadows. That was the honest truth of it. The thing Margot would admit later, when she had enough distance to find it funny. She'd stepped off the plane in San Francisco with her stomach in a knot and her jaw set, and the careful alertness of someone walking into a room they've been warned about, ready for the weight of Ga-min's world to land on her the moment her feet touched California ground. Instead, the sun was out. It was a ridiculous bright afternoon. Warm and gold and unhurried, the bay glittering in the distance like it had somewhere to be and was in no rush to get there. The city unrolled itself before her in layers. Hills and bridges and the clean salt smell of Pacific air. And nothing about it said danger or consequence or the things you saw on a police body cam in Philadelphia. It just said, California. Welcome. Relax. She didn't relax. But she filed it. The estate was in Pacific Heights, which she had to look up on her phone in the car because she didn't know San Francisco geography, and what she found told her that Pacific Heights was where serious money lived. Old money, new money, the kind of money that didn't need to announce itself because the architecture did it. The estate sat on several acres above the city, hidden behind stone walls and old trees. The gate opened before they reached it. Beyond it, the driveway curved through gardens and terraced lawns toward a very large house. Not a mansion in the theatrical sense. Not gold-plated excess. Something worse. Something that had been designed by people who never needed to prove they were wealthy, because everyone already knew. You have a garden, she said. I have a gardener, Ga-min said, from beside her in the car. Do you ever? She gestured at the visible roses, the low hedges, the general sense of considered care. No. You could. He looked at the garden. I have a gardener, he said again, with the mild finality of a man who has examined this possibility and found it unnecessary. She laughed. The place was objectively ridiculous. The walls. The gates. The acres of manicured California sunlight. And yet nothing had descended on her. The sun was still out. The first week passed in something approaching wonder. She'd expected his San Francisco life to be darker than Philadelphia. More fortress, more surveillance, more the texture she'd felt closing in around her in those last weeks before they left. Instead she found a breakfast routine, a housekeeper named Mrs. Han who expressed affection through the absolute refusal to let Margot make her own coffee, and a schedule for Ga-min that included actual meetings, actual boardrooms, actual employees who greeted him with a complicated mixture of professionalism and what she could only describe as devotion. She sat in the lobby of his company's building on the second day, waiting for him, and watched his employees move. They were good at their jobs. You could see it in the way the place ran, the unhurried efficiency of it, the sense that everyone knew exactly where they were supposed to be and was glad to be there. A woman stepped out of the elevator, glanced at her phone, and smiled. We hit the Q3 projections. The man beside her grinned. Seriously? She nodded. Nice. They kept walking. She thought, these people actually work for him. In a company that does real things. She thought, I don't know what I expected. She thought, I think I expected something out of a film. Her own company came through with the transfer 2 weeks in, a small project management role in the San Francisco office, the same work she'd done in Philadelphia. The same rhythms and deliverables, and the comfortable, honest satisfaction of being competent at something that required actual skill. She found a desk. She found a commute. She found a coffee shop 3 blocks from the office that made a very good oat latte, and played music that was trying slightly too hard, which she found endearing. She had, in other words, a life. She relaxed. Gradually, incrementally, in the way of someone setting down a weight they've been carrying so long they forgot it was heavy. She stopped waiting for the shadows. She started sleeping through the night. She thought, maybe I overreacted. Maybe it's not like that here. She would eventually understand, not wrong about California. She was just wrong about where the danger would come from. The birthday party was on a yacht in the bay. Margot had expected dinner. Instead she'd been handed a glass of champagne and guided onto something large enough to have multiple decks and a crew. The birthday boy was one of Ga-min's cousins. 30-something. Popular. Apparently the sort of person who could convince 50 people to spend a Saturday afternoon on a boat. Sunlight flashed across the windows of the skyline beyond the bay. The weather was perfect. She should have been having a better time. The first few conversations went fine. A woman asked how she was settling into California. A man asked whether she'd always lived in Philadelphia. Someone else recommended 3 different hiking trails. Everyone was friendly. Nobody was relaxed. It took her a while to notice. The way conversations seemed to pause when Ga-min walked past. The way people checked where he was before saying certain things. The way some of the women smiled at her with careful politeness, and then immediately looked away. Not rude. Just careful. Philadelphia again. She found herself at the railing with a second glass of champagne she didn't really want. The water below was dark blue. The city sat beyond it, bright and distant. You're hiding. Margot turned. The woman standing beside her was beautiful. Not intimidatingly beautiful. Comfortably beautiful. Like someone who knew exactly who she was and had no interest in proving it. You are the third person who's accused me of that. Then maybe stop standing near escape routes. Margot laughed. The woman pointed at her. There it is. What? An actual reaction. I'm reacting all over the place. No, you've been polite all afternoon. The woman held out her hand. I'm Gloria. Everyone calls me Glo. Margot. I know. That's slightly concerning. My fiancé is the birthday boy. She pointed toward a dark-haired man surrounded by relatives and a birthday cake that appeared far too large for the number of people present. Oh. Which means I've spent the last hour watching people be weird around you. Margot blinked. Weird. Glo stared at her. Are we pretending that's not happening? For a moment, Margot didn't answer. Because she'd been thinking exactly the same thing. Glo rolled her eyes. They do this every time. Every time what? Every time Ga-min shows up. That surprised a laugh out of her. Thank God. What? I thought I was imagining it. No, you're definitely not imagining it. For the first time all afternoon, someone sounded honest. Not careful. Not polite. Honest. Glo leaned against the railing. I actually wanted to meet you. Why? Because you're interesting. Margot laughed. I assure you I'm not. You are to him. That caught her off guard. Glo shrugged. Ga-min doesn't bring people around. The statement was simple. Matter of fact. No teasing attached to it. He brought you. Margot looked across the deck. Ga-min was talking to 3 men near the upper stairs. As though he felt it, he looked up. Their eyes met. The familiar warmth settled in her chest. Then he noticed Glo standing beside her. Something crossed his face. A look Margot couldn't quite read. Not concern. Not surprise. Just recognition. Glo followed her gaze. Oh. What? He's already decided this is a bad idea. What is? Us. Should I be worried? Probably. The answer was so immediate that Margot laughed. Glo grinned. Come on. You're new here. That obvious? Painfully. She hooked her arm through Margot's. I'll show you California. It should have sounded ridiculous. Instead, after 2 days of feeling like every conversation came with invisible rules she didn't understand, it sounded wonderful. Okay, Margot said. Glo's smile widened. Excellent. She paused. I have terrible ideas. Glo moved like weather, fast, warm, everywhere at once, leaving the people around her slightly rearranged. She arrived at Margot's office building one afternoon with a car, a stylist's appointment she'd booked without asking, and the absolute conviction that Margot's lunch break should be spent on something more interesting than the sad desk salad she'd been eating. Margot went, because the salad was genuinely sad, and because Glo was the kind of force that it felt easier to move with than against. The stylist was in a building that had no sign visible from the street, and required a name to access. The clothes were extraordinary. Glo picked things for her that she would never have pulled for herself. Colors deeper than she usually wore, silhouettes that required confidence she was still building. And then watched with bright, specific attention while Margot tried them on. That one, Glo said, when Margot emerged in a dress that was jeweled silver and cost considerably more than she would spend on clothing without deeply regretting it. It's a lot. It's you. You just haven't been introduced yet. Margot looked at herself in the mirror. She thought about the woman in the mirror and the woman she'd been in Philadelphia. Same person, she insisted to herself, the same Margot who ate corner bodega sandwiches and argued with project management software and called her mother on Sunday afternoons, and felt, for just a moment, a flutter of something she couldn't name. She bought the dress. She told herself it was a treat. It was a treat. 3 weeks into her new role, Margot discovered that California had not improved the universal experience of chasing people who refused to answer emails. The contractor had been avoiding her for 3 weeks. For emails. 2 voicemails. 1 scheduling assistant who appeared professionally committed to never actually scheduling anything. By the time she met Glo for lunch on Friday, she was irritated enough that Glo noticed immediately. What's wrong? Work. That narrows it down enormously. Margot sighed and explained. The project. The contractor. The slipping timeline. The increasingly ridiculous effort required to get a single meeting. Glo listened, then held out her hand. Give me the name. No. Why? Because I know that tone. What tone? The one that immediately becomes a problem. Glo grinned. Give me the name. Margot should not have. She knew she should not have. Instead she told her. Glo immediately picked up her phone. Glo. Relax. She made a call. Waited. Then smiled. Hi. It's Gloria. Her smile widened. She leaned back in her chair. Yes, that Gloria. Margot closed her eyes. Oh no. Glo listened for a moment. Then said casually. Listen. A friend of mine has been trying to get a meeting with your client for 3 weeks. Pause. A longer pause. Then. No. She's far too polite to tell you she's frustrated. Margot covered her face. Glo. Glo waved her off. Still smiling. No. Tomorrow at 2 would be perfect. Another pause. Then the line Margot would remember later. The line that made Glo visibly happy. Thank you. I'll let Mr. Gong know you were helpful. She hung up. The smile remained. Not relief. Not satisfaction. Something else. Enjoyment. Pure enjoyment. Tomorrow at 2. Margot stared at her. You cannot be serious. I am completely serious. That isn't how meetings happen. It literally is. We just watched it happen. Glo. What? You used his name. Of course I used his name. As though the answer were obvious. As though she had asked why someone might use a door instead of climbing through a window. Margot shook her head. You shouldn't do things like that. Why not? Because I should be able to get a meeting without. Without what? Margot stopped. Glo tilted her head. Without people knowing who you're dating? The question landed harder than it should have. That's different. It isn't. It is. Glo laughed. No. The difference is that you still think this world works the way it did before you met him. She stood, picked up her handbag. And for the record, you're welcome. The meeting happened at 2 the next day. The contractor's office called within the hour to confirm. The scheduling assistant sounded attentive. Helpful, even. The meeting was excellent. The project timeline recovered. Margot told herself she was horrified. She was. A little. But the project timeline had recovered. And somewhere beneath the discomfort sat something far more dangerous. Relief. The changes were small enough that Margot didn't notice them at first. A dinner reservation that appeared after Glo made a phone call. An invitation that arrived sooner than expected. A conversation that became easier the moment someone connected her to Ga-min. None of it felt dramatic. That was the problem. Glo never presented any of it as power. She presented it as efficiency. Why make life harder than it needs to be? She asked one afternoon. Margot didn't have a good answer. Over time, she found herself noticing the same things Glo noticed. Who mattered in a room. Who people listened to. Which names changed conversations. Which ones didn't. At a networking event, she spent nearly 40 minutes trying unsuccessfully to speak to a developer connected to a project she wanted. The man was busy. Or avoiding her. Possibly both. Eventually, they found themselves standing near the same table. The conversation started slowly. Then, somewhere in the middle of it, she mentioned that she'd recently moved to California to be with her boyfriend, Ga-min, who ran Gong Holdings. Nothing more than that. A simple fact. The developer's attention sharpened immediately. The rest of the conversation lasted 20 minutes. He gave her his direct number before he left. Walking back to her car later, Margot found herself replaying the exchange. The project would benefit from the connection. The conversation had been useful. Nothing inappropriate had happened. And yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Not in the room. In her. The uncomfortable part wasn't that it had worked. The uncomfortable part was that she understood exactly why Glo liked it. Glo had insisted on lunch at a place Margot couldn't have booked in her old life. White tablecloths. Muted conversations. The kind of restaurant where the waiters remembered your name even if you'd only been there once. The woman joined them halfway through lunch. Margot had never met her before. She arrived with the easy familiarity of someone Glo knew well, kissed Glo's cheek, greeted Margot warmly, and slid into the empty chair beside them. Glo introduced her as Janine. She was pleasant, funny, well-dressed, the kind of woman who made conversation look effortless. Glo was halfway through a story when she excused herself to the restroom, leaving Margot alone with Janine. At first, the conversation was harmless. Then Janine leaned in. "Actually, since we're talking about work," she said lightly, tracing the rim of her glass, "my husband has been waiting to hear back from Mr. Gong. Nothing urgent, of course. I'm sure he's busy." Margot blinked. "Oh, it would just help him sleep," the woman continued, smiling as if she were discussing the weather. "Waiting on Ga-min's answer, I mean. But I shouldn't burden you with that. Let's enjoy lunch." She changed the subject effortlessly. But the comment stayed with Margot long after the bill arrived. That evening she mentioned it casually while Ga-min was pouring tea. They were eating dinner in the kitchen. Ga-min had come home late. She was telling him about her day. About Glo. About the restaurant. "Oh, Glo brought someone to lunch today. Her husband is waiting on a decision from you about something." "What?" Margot told him. The woman's name. The husband. The pending decision. The sleepless nights. The uncertainty. The request that wasn't really a request. Ga-min listened. Expressionless. When she finished, he simply nodded once. Nothing more. The conversation moved on. And by the end of the evening, she had almost forgotten it. A week later she was shopping with Glo when she saw Janine again. They were crossing a luxury department store when Margot spotted her near the cosmetics section. Margot smiled, lifting a hand in greeting. Janine saw her. And froze. Not startled. Not embarrassment. Not awkwardness. Fear. Raw. Immediate. She turned sharply and walked away, fast, nearly knocking over a display on her way out. Margot's hand dropped. "What was that?" she asked. Glo didn't look at her. She kept flipping through a rack of dresses. Margot grabbed her arm. "What was that?" Glo looked at her. For once there was no smile. No amusement. No performance. Just a long silence. Then, "You understand you can't do that again," Glo said quietly. Margot stared. "Do what?" "You can't talk to people about him. Not anyone." Margot felt her stomach tighten. What happened to them? Glo finally looked at her. And didn't answer. That evening Margot found Ga-min in his office, sleeves rolled up, reading something on his tablet. He looked up when she entered. Immediately. Always immediately. "Did you hurt him?" she asked. His expression didn't change. "Who?" "The woman from lunch, Janine." Silence. "Her husband." Silence. Margot felt her pulse quicken. "What happened?" "Nothing." "Did you ruin them?" Silence. The silence was becoming an answer. Her throat tightened. "Is he dead?" Something flashed across his face. "Gone almost instantly." "No." Relief arrived. Briefly. Then vanished. Because it wasn't enough. "What did you do?" Ga-min set the tablet down. "I told you," he said quietly. "California is not Philly." A pause. "There are rules here." The words landed heavily. The silence that followed was deliberate. Controlled. Final. Margot felt something uncomfortable settle in her chest. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting. It was their first real fight. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just two people standing on opposite sides of a truth she wasn't ready to see. She realized she wasn't looking at the man who brought her coffee in the mornings. She was looking at Gong Ga-min. And for the first time, she understood why he'd fought so hard to keep California separate from the rest of his life. The dinner party was her idea, which was the part she would most want to forget later. Glo had floated it, just floated it, the way Glo floated things, making them seem like they'd already happened and you were just catching up. You should celebrate him. Show him you understand his world. These men respond to being seen. Margot had genuine intention behind it. She loved him. She wanted to do something that communicated it in the language of the world he actually lived in. Not the contained, quiet domesticity of their Philadelphia evenings, but something that matched the scale of who he was here. She organized it herself, with Glo's enthusiastic assistance, and she was proud of it as she watched the caterers set up in the dining room. 40 guests, a cocktail hour, flowers that had required a specific phone call to a specific florist, a dinner menu she'd spent a week adjusting. He walked in, and she watched his face. He was, as always, composed. He's greeted people. He accepted champagne. He moved through the room with the quiet, gravitational ease of someone for whom any room is manageable. The business associates loved it. She could see it, the pleasure they took in being included, in the scale of the gesture, in the sense that Gong Ga-min had a woman who understood how to host. She found him near the window between courses, standing slightly apart from the group, and she came to stand beside him. "What do you think?" she asked. He looked at her. His eyes were doing something careful. "You went to a lot of trouble," he said. It was not a non-answer. It was a very specific answer, and she would understand later what he meant, that he saw the trouble, and valued the intention, and could not tell her that the party, beautiful, excessive, impeccably calibrated to impress the people in the room, was a party for the version of him that California saw. Not for the man who put her slippers by the bed, and watched documentaries in silence, and kissed her shoulder in the morning, like it was the most natural thing in the world. She didn't understand then. She thought he was overwhelmed. She thought she'd succeeded. The sun was low enough to turn the glass of Ga-min's building gold. Margot had stopped by after work, expecting a quick hello, maybe dinner. He'd been in a meeting, but the moment she stepped into his office, his whole posture softened, shoulders lowering, voice dropping, gaze warming in that way that always made her feel like she was the only person in the room. They walked out together, his hand brushing the small of her back, the evening breeze cool against her skin. The courtyard was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt curated. Guards positioned discreetly. They were 3 steps from the car when a woman broke through the security line. She didn't run. She stumbled. Her hair was unwashed, her clothes wrinkled, her face blotchy from crying. 2 guards moved instantly, but she dropped to her knees before they could reach her. "Mr. Gong, please, please." Her voice cracked on the second please, like her throat had been scraped raw. Margot froze. Ga-min didn't. He stepped forward, calm, controlled. The woman grabbed his sleeve with shaking hands. "They took him. 3 days ago. Men came to his office. No one will tell me anything. The police won't help, he hasn't had his medication. Please, I'm begging you, please." Margot's breath caught. Ga-min's expression didn't change, but something in the air did. A shift. A tightening. "Get her up," he said quietly. 2 guards lifted the woman gently, guiding her toward the bench near the fountain. "Bring her water," he added, "and find out where her husband was taken." His men moved instantly, steps purposeful. The woman sobbed into her hands. "Please save him. Please." Ga-min nodded once. "I'll look into it." That was all. Not a promise. Not a guarantee. 5 words. The woman broke completely. Not because he said he would find her husband. Not because he promised success. Because he had said yes. As though that alone meant something. As though the odds had changed. As though help had finally arrived. And for the first time since coming to California, Margot understood exactly why she'd been afraid to come. Not because people feared him. Because when things became impossible, they came to him anyway. She hadn't asked Ga-min about the woman again. She wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. 3 days later, the afternoon was warm enough that Margot sat by the pool with her feet in the water, a book open, but unread in her lap. The compound was calm. Gardeners trimming hedges, guards walking their usual routes. She didn't hear the 2 guards at first. Not until their voices drifted over the balcony walkway above her. "All that because she moved the Tang project," one said. Margot's head lifted. "The woman from Philly?" the other asked. "Yeah. She used Mr. Gong's name." Designer panicked, pushed the Tang meeting. They took it personal. Margot's stomach dropped. They grabbed the designer. He didn't have his medication. They made sure he felt it. Her breath caught. The wife went straight to Mr. Gong. He's lucky Mr. Gong's men got there in time. Half the Tang crew ended up in the hospital. The pool water rippled around her ankles. They had to call a sit-down after that. Tensions are bad again. A pause. "If she asks, don't say anything. He doesn't want her to know." Margot didn't move. Didn't breathe. The guards walked on, their voices fading. The sun was bright. The water was warm. The world looked exactly the same. But she felt like she'd been dropped into cold, deep water. All she had done was mention Ga-min's name. A casual conversation. A simple request. The designer had heard something she never meant to say. Had moved the wrong project. Had offended the wrong people. And the consequences had rolled outward from there. A missing man. A desperate wife. Men in hospital. A sit-down between families. She had done this. Not deliberately. Not knowingly. But she had done it all the same. And Ga-min had cleaned it up without telling her. Quietly. Completely. As though protecting her from the fallout was simply another thing he did. She pulled her feet from the water and wrapped her arms around her knees. She had wanted to see who Ga-min was in California. She hadn't expected to discover what his name could do in the hands of other people, or what could happen when it left hers. Later that evening, she found him in the kitchen. He looked up when she entered. Immediately. Always immediately. Hey. Hey. She opened the refrigerator without really seeing what was inside. Closed it again. Opened it a second time. Behind her, silence. Not awkward silence. Ga-min silence. The kind that waited. The kind that noticed. She would understand later that he had been watching for weeks. Not watching her in the suspicious sense. Watching her the way he watched everything important, patiently, thoroughly, without announcing it. The dinner party had told him more than she realized. What? She finally asked. He was leaning against the counter, watching her. Are you happy here? The question landed harder than it should have. She looked away. Of course I'm happy. He said nothing, which was almost worse. She could feel his attention. Patient. Unhurried. Certain. I'm happy, she repeated, and heard the defensiveness immediately. His expression didn't change. Okay, he said. Just that. Okay. Then he turned back toward the coffee machine. No argument. No pressure. No attempt to corner her. Because he already knew. And because she suddenly realized she didn't actually know how to answer the question. The silence stretched. She sat down at the island. He set a cup of coffee in front of her without asking. She stared at it. Finally, did you fix it? The movement of his hand paused briefly. Only briefly. But she saw it. The designer. A beat. Then another. Yes. Her throat tightened. Because she had known. Of course she had known. But hearing it was different. Because of me. He looked at her. Said nothing. Which was answer enough. She looked down at her hands. I didn't know, she said quietly. I know. I didn't mean for any of that to happen. I know. The same answer. The same certainty. No anger. No disappointment. Which somehow made everything worse. She laughed once. A small, miserable sound. All I did was mention your name. Ga-min was quiet for a moment. I thought the designer was being helpful. He was. She frowned. What? He was trying to avoid making a mistake. That somehow felt worse. Because she understood exactly what he meant. The designer hadn't been afraid of her. He'd been afraid of choosing wrong. Afraid of misreading proximity to power. Afraid of the consequences. And in trying to avoid one mistake, he'd made another. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. I hate this. Her voice cracked on the last word, barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator. His voice softened. Margot. She shook her head. I don't know what's mine anymore. The words escaped before she could stop them. She stared at the countertop. He stepped closer. Took her hand. Held it. He lifted her hand and pressed his mouth against her knuckles. Once. Slowly. Deliberately. The way he did when he was trying to comfort her without arguing. He stepped between her knees where she sat at the island. Reached up. Tucked a loose curl behind her ear. Then bent and pressed a kiss to her forehead. Look at me. Margot. She looked up. He lifted his hand and curved it around the side of her neck, slow, his thumb resting at the line of her jaw. A question. She answered it by leaning in, closing the small, careful distance between them, and kissing him. Not with urgency, not the way fear or relief tended to make people kiss, but with the quiet deliberateness of a decision. Certain. Eyes open until they weren't. He kissed her back the same way. His hand slid into her hair, cradling the back of her head, and she felt the counter's edge at her back and the solid warmth of him in front of her. She didn't move from the counter. She wasn't sure she could. He was still standing between her knees, his hand curved around her neck, and the kitchen had somehow gotten smaller, the air in it different, like a room where a window had just been shut against the weather. She became very aware of the hem of her shirt. The countertop's edge. The way his thumb was tracing an absent path along her jaw that she was almost certain he didn't realize he was doing. Almost certain. Someone could come down, she said. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. He looked at her steadily. They won't. You don't know that. I do. She searched his face for the arrogance in it, and didn't find any. Just the particular certainty that lived in him like a low frequency, constant and unhurried. How, she said. Because they know better. She blinked. Then laughed, a real one, surprised out of her. She curled her fingers into the front of his shirt. The kitchen, she managed. We're in the kitchen. I know where we are, he said quietly. She stopped. Lost the thread entirely when his mouth found her lips. Later, she would not be able to say exactly how the kitchen became the hallway, or the hallway became the stairs. She remembered the cool of the wall against her back at some point. His mouth. The quiet sound of her own breath. The way he said her name once, low and close to her ear, not asking anything, just saying it, like he was confirming something to himself. She remembered his hand finding hers in the dark and holding it as they went upstairs. After she rested her forehead against his shoulder, he wrapped an arm around her and held her there. No explanations. No solutions. Just the steady certainty of him. And for the first time since arriving in California, she understood that the thing she'd been afraid of wasn't discovering who Ga-min was. It was discovering what his world could do to ordinary people. Including her. The fight started, as most real fights do, about the wrong thing. She was defending the yacht. Glo had put together a summer event with the elaborate care she put into everything, and had included Margot in the planning in a way that felt, genuinely, like inclusion, like being part of something rather than being managed by it. Ga-min said, not unkindly, "I don't think Glo is helping you." Margot said, "She's the only person who has actively tried. You don't need her." And then they were in it. Because what she heard was, he is telling you what to want. He is telling you who to be friends with. He kept you from California, and now he wants to manage California too. And what he was saying, what he meant, underneath the careful words, was something she wasn't ready to hear. She introduced you to a world, and told you it was yours, he said. It isn't. At least she makes me feel like I can exist here. You could exist here on your own. I don't know anyone here. I don't know the city, I don't know. She stopped. You are gone for 12 hours a day doing things you won't explain, and I have no idea how to be in this life. Glo makes it make sense. She's the only person who has actively tried. Silence. You don't get to be angry that she got there first. He was quiet for a long moment. You two are opposites. What does she give you that you think you're missing? The question landed wrong. She heard judgment in it. She picked up her phone, and went to the bedroom, and they did not speak for the rest of the evening, and she lay on her side of the bed in the dark, and felt the fight settle into something colder and more honest than its surface suggested. She thought, why am I defending her so hard? She didn't follow the thought all the way to the end. Not yet. The nightclub was Glo's suggestion, which they all were. A Wednesday. Glo had a gift for midweek evenings in places that behaved like Saturdays. The club was in Soma, and it was the kind of room that made exclusivity part of the entertainment. The line outside stretched halfway down the block. A velvet rope divided the people waiting from the people who weren't. Margot and Glo never stopped walking. The host smiled immediately. A table appeared. A bottle arrived 10 minutes later. Margot glanced at it. We didn't order that. Glo laughed. Of course we didn't. The bottle stayed. Nobody brought a bill. Margot felt something small and uncomfortable settle in her chest. 2 months ago she might have questioned it. Now she simply watched the server pour. That realization bothered her more than the bottle itself. The night continued. Glo was in her element. She knew everyone. Or seemed to. People stopped to say hello. Managers appeared. Promoters drifted over. Drinks materialized. Doors opened. The city rearranged itself around her with such effortless consistency that it almost looked natural. Almost. Margot watched from her seat, tired in a way that had nothing to do with work. The fight with Ga-min still sat heavily in her chest. The designer. The wife. The conversation by the pool. All of it lingering beneath the surface. A manager appeared beside the table. Ms. Cole, he said to Glo. The terrace just opened up if you'd like it. Margot glanced toward the terrace. It had been full all evening. Glo smiled. That's sweet. Thank you. The manager left. 2 minutes later a group was quietly escorted away from the section they'd occupied. Not thrown out. Not mistreated. Just moved. The terrace was suddenly available. Margot watched them gather their drinks and belongings. Watched the confusion on one woman's face. Watched the brief disappointment before she forced a smile and followed the hostess elsewhere. Nobody complained. Nobody argued. The decision had already been made. Glo didn't even seem to notice. Or perhaps she noticed and simply considered it normal. The distinction felt less important than it should have. They moved to the terrace. The view was beautiful. The city lights stretched across the bay. Everyone out there seemed happy. Margot felt strangely cold. She looked down toward the entrance below. The line was still there. People waiting. People hoping. People trying to get in. And suddenly, she found herself wondering what the evening looked like from their side of the rope. From the outside. Not Glow. Not Ga-min. Her. The woman who never waited anymore. The woman who was always let through. The woman people made room for. She had spent months telling herself she was different. More careful. More considerate. Less obvious. But from the other side of the rope, did that distinction really matter? The thought landed harder than she expected. She set down her glass. I'm going home. Glow blinked. What? I'm tired. It's not even 10. I'm still going home. For the first time all evening, Glow looked genuinely confused. Margot stood, picked up her clutch, and left. She walked through the club, past the terrace, past the tables, past the velvet rope, into the cool San Francisco night. Then she got into a car and went home to Ga-min. He was awake when she got in. Of course he was. He was on the couch with a tablet and a glass of water and the quiet, still presence of a man who does not perform being casual, who is simply calm in his own space in a way she had initially found intimidating and now found more grounding than she knew how to articulate. He looked up when she came in. He took in her face. He set down the tablet. What happened, he said. She sat on the coffee table across from him, which was not where you were supposed to sit, and he didn't say anything about that. She'd been composing something in the car, an explanation, a defense, a way of presenting this that was coherent and measured. What came out instead was the actual thing. I don't want you to feel like you're missing out, she said. He was still. You could be with someone who, she stopped. Tried again. Someone who has connections. Who moves easily in your world. Who doesn't need to figure out the rules. She looked at her hands. I don't want to embarrass you. I've been trying to not embarrass you, and I think I've been doing it wrong, and I don't. Her voice was doing something complicated. She held it steady. I don't want you to regret choosing me. I keep looking at your world and thinking about all the ways I don't fit it, and I've been letting Glow teach me to fit it better, and tonight I watched her and I thought, that's what I look like. And I don't want to be that. But I also don't know how to be me here. She looked up. He was watching her with an expression she'd never seen on him before. Not composed, not controlled, not the careful, managed blankness that he wore through the world like armor. He looked, for one visible moment, like someone who has just heard something that hurt him. Margot, he said. She waited. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, closer to her level, and he looked at her the way he always looked at her, like she was the only thing in the room. And when he spoke, it was in the quieter register he kept only for her. You don't need to become anything. She opened her mouth. Let me finish. Not unkind. Firm. If I had wanted a woman from this world, I would have had one. A long time ago. I have had opportunities. I had no interest. He held her gaze without flinching. What makes you Margot is that you are not from it. Your warmth. Your stubbornness. The fact that you argue with me about gardening. The fact that you are the only person in my life who has ever asked if I'm eating and meant it as care rather than strategy. Something moved through his eyes. I told you in Philadelphia that you were the only place I didn't have to be who I am. That is still true. If you become this world, I lose that. And I don't accept that. She pressed her lips together. Her eyes were doing things she hadn't authorized. I know it's hard, he said, more quietly still. Being somewhere new. Not knowing anyone. Watching me leave every morning for a life you don't have access to. He paused. I know Glow made you feel less alone. I understand why you trusted her. She wasn't trying to hurt me. I think she genuinely. I know, he said. That's not the same as being good for you. She exhaled. The thing she'd been carrying for weeks shifted, slightly, redistributed some of its weight. I've been so worried, she said, about being enough for your world that I forgot to just be enough for you. He reached forward and took her hand. His thumb traced the same slow arc it always did, across her knuckle, and she thought. 7 years. He has been this patient for 7 years. He is the most patient person I've ever met, and he chose me. You don't need to earn your place here, he said. You are my place. She leaned forward and kissed him, and he brought his other hand up to the back of her neck. Warm and steadying, and they stayed like that for a long moment while the city went on being San Francisco outside the window, indifferent and golden and full of things she was going to learn on her own terms. Glow called 3 days later and suggested lunch, which Margot accepted because she was not someone who avoided conversations. They met at a restaurant in Hayes Valley, somewhere Glow had chosen, pleasant and light-filled, and very far, she noticed, from the private dining rooms and reserved tables and bottle service clubs of the last 2 months. She wondered if it was deliberate. She wondered if Glow noticed the change in her. Glow noticed everything. They were on their second glass of wine, navigating the pleasantries when Glow said, You've been quiet. I've been thinking about. Margot looked at her. She thought about how to do this, how to be honest without being cruel, how to say the true thing without letting it become a performance of righteous distance. She thought about who she'd been before the stylist appointments and the name-dropping and the dinner party. I think we're different people, she said. I think we want different things from being here. And I think, she paused. I don't think the way I've been living for the last 2 months is good for me. And I think a lot of those choices traced back to you. Glow was still for a moment. Then the composure shifted, and underneath it was something Margot hadn't seen before. Not warmth, not performance, but something older and rawer and much more tired. That's what people with power say, Glow said. Her voice was still pleasant. The pleasantness had gone slightly thin. That's what people say when they have the luxury of choosing limits. Glow, you have Ga-min's card. You have his name. You have his world wrapped around you like a coat. Something hardened in her expression. You can afford to be principled because you're protected. I'm not using his name. That's the point. You don't need to. It uses itself. You walk into a room and the room already knows. She put down her wine glass. I spent years being invisible, being replaceable, watching other people move through rooms that I couldn't access. And then I found G1, and I understood how those rooms worked, and I decided, she stopped. Her jaw moved. I decided I would never be invisible again. Margot looked at her, and suddenly understood. Glow wasn't protecting the life she'd built. She was protecting the girl who had existed before it. I'm sorry, Margot said. I'm not angry at you. I understand why you. Don't be kind to me right now, Glow said. It's condescending. They finished lunch without finishing the conversation. Glow left first, with a grace that cost her something, and Margot sat alone with the last of her wine and thought. She wasn't showing me who to become. She was showing me who she became. They were very different things. G1 arrived at the house one morning, and Margot knew from the sound of his voice in the hallway, even from upstairs, through a closed door, that something had broken. She came down to find him in the kitchen, and the careful composure that G1 wore so naturally had dissolved into something red-eyed and uncharacteristically young. Ga-min was standing across from him with his arms crossed, listening in the way he listened to things that mattered, completely, without interruption, giving the whole of his attention. Glow had gone. Not a fight, not a scene, gone, in the careful, decisive way of someone who has been planning an exit while performing a stay. She'd left a note that was, by G1's account, honest in a way that was almost worse than cruelty. She needed more than what he could give her. She's with someone else. She needed to keep moving. She was sorry for his feelings. She was not sorry for the decision. Margot sat with G1 and made tea and listened, and after he'd gone she sat alone in the kitchen while Ga-min came and stood behind her and put both hands on her shoulders, warm and steady. I didn't see it, she said. Neither did G1. I should have. I can see it now looking back. Everything she did, it was always about the next level. The next room. The next name. She turned her mug in her hands. She wasn't showing me California. She was showing me the only California she knew. He was quiet for a moment. She gave you something too. Terrible dinner party advice. Not all of it was bad. The pots worth keeping are yours. His hands pressed slightly. The rest was hers, Margot said. 3 months later, she had a routine. Not Glow's routine, not private clubs and impossible reservations, and the elaborate infrastructure of conspicuous access. Her own routine, the coffee shop that played music trying too hard, the office where she'd rebuilt her professional reputation on actual work, the evening with 2 colleagues she'd befriended organically, who knew her as Margot from the project team, and liked her for reasons entirely her own. She had mapped the city. On foot, mostly. She knew the hills and the neighborhoods, and the particular quality of fog that rolled in off the bay on winter mornings, and she had found a Korean grocery she liked better than the upscale one Glow had taken her to, and she had found a bakery, and she had found, in the accumulated small geography of her own choices, something that felt like hers. She was still herself. She was also more, some version of herself that had been pressure-tested and had come through it still recognizable. It felt less like surviving and more like arriving. The event was a philanthropy gala in February, one of Ga-min's obligations, the kind he attended twice a year with the focused patience of a man who understands that visibility is occasionally required. She wore the jeweled silver dress from the stylist appointment, which was still extraordinary, and was now simply a dress she owned, with no particular weight attached to where it came from. She was talking to the director of a non-profit focused on arts education. Real conversation. Work she understood. A woman whose passion for the subject matched her own. when a man approached whose name she recognized from the project she'd been leading for the past month. His company had been difficult to reach. 3 weeks of scheduling friction, an email chain that had started to feel familiar in the worst way. He recognized her first. She watched the recognition travel across his face. Who she was with, the particular recalibration. "Miss Shaw," he said, with the careful, attentive warmth of someone who had made a rapid decision. "I've been meaning to respond to your team's outreach. Let's find time this week. I think there's a lot of potential here." She looked at him for a moment. The old temptation moved through her, just a flicker, warm and easy, the specific pleasure of a door swinging open without the work of a knob. She knew how this went. She knew what she could say. She'd learned in the last 6 months the exact shape and weight of the name she carried. She smiled. "We'd love that," she said. "My assistant can send you the scheduling link. It'll need to go through the proper channels on our end. We're pretty process-driven." She turned back to the nonprofit director. "I'm sorry, you were saying about the Oakland program?" She felt Ga-min before she saw him. That hadn't changed, that quality of warmth and gravity, the specific reorganization of the air around her when he was close. He appeared at her elbow, exchanged a brief nod with the contractor, who found somewhere else to be with an efficiency that would have amused her once, and now simply registered. He didn't say anything. She felt him smile. Not visibly. Ga-min didn't do visible smiles in rooms like this. But she knew the temperature of him well enough to know. She kept talking to the nonprofit director. He stayed close. The commotion at the door was the kind that rooms responded to, a ripple of attention, heads turning, the subtle reorganization of people who track power and have registered its arrival. A new energy entered the room. A man she didn't recognize, mid-40s, the composed assurance of serious wealth, surrounded by the specific gravitational field of someone the room was already calculating. And on his arm, luminous, effortless, wearing something extraordinary. Glow. She looked across the room and found Margot immediately, with the precision of someone who had known exactly who would be here. Her expression was unreadable, not cold, not warm, just composed in a way that was familiar and different. She looked like someone who had made a decision and was standing inside it. Her date's eyes moved to Ga-min. That was the tell. He found Ga-min the way people always found Ga-min. Involuntarily, immediately, the specific gravitational response of someone who knew what they were looking at. But unlike Alan Kim, unlike the restaurant owner, unlike the careful and frightened people Margot had catalogued over the last year, this man's expression did not go careful. It went something else. Something that made the temperature of the man at Margot's elbow drop by several degrees. She looked up at him. His face was composed. His face was always composed. But she knew him, the whole of him, and she could feel the shift, the slight recalibration, the particular stillness of someone who has registered something that requires attention. "Who is that?" she said, quietly. He looked down at her. The stillness held. Something moved at the back of his eyes. "An inconvenience," he said. She looked at him. She looked at the man across the room, who was still holding the stare with a composure that was either bravery or profound miscalculation. She looked at Glow, who had turned to say something to her date and was not, notably, looking anywhere near Margot or Ga-min. Ga-min's hand stayed at her back, and neither of them looked at the door again. For now.